Chapter 14. The emperor returned to Elchingen and slept there, and next day set out for Augsburg, where he lodged at the bishop's. Here he remained during the time requisite for organizing a new combination of marches, and then departed. He had learned in such a manner as to be nearly certain that the Russians were approaching. Travelers from Linz had seen the first troops of that nation enter the town as fast as they arrived. They placed themselves in carts and wagons collected beforehand and set out to post for Bavaria. This haste was probably the result of the intelligence received by Kutuzov, the commander-in-chief, that we had passed the Rhine. It was not long before he was surprised at the events which had taken place at Ulm and changed his plans. From Augsburg, the emperor went to Munich. He there received all the Bavarian authorities and promised not to forget their country in the treaty peace. The elector had not yet returned to his capital, but he had not omitted to give orders that the reception of the emperor should be suitable and proportionate to the advantages which Bavaria derived from the first success of the campaign. The Bavarians expressed their gratitude by illuminations, and though the city was filled with French soldiers, no complaints were heard. It was not possible, however, but that some excesses should be committed. Our army crossed the Iser over all the bridges from that of Munich to that of Plating and approached the Inn. The emperor, with a large portion of his army, took the road to Mühldorf. The first Russian troops had advanced as far as that place and returned after they were apprised of what had befallen Marshal Mack. Beyond Mühldorf, we found not a single bridge that we had not to rebuild entirely. The Russians burned them in a manner that was till then unknown to us, so that we were obliged to send on with the advance guard companies of sappers together with engineers, who had plenty to do. From Mühldorf, the emperor proceeded to Burghausen and then to Braunau. It was believed that there was a garrison in that place, but to our great surprise, we found the gates open, the fortifications in a very good condition, well palisaded artillery on the ramparts, and the magazines full of provisions. The bridge over the Inn was burned. 2,000 men in this place would have done us a great deal of injury, but they would have obliged us to blockade them and to derange all the directions of our communications, which would have been a great inconvenience to us, as the season had become very wet. The emperor judged that people must have lost their senses to commit such faults, and ordered the rebuilding of the bridge to be set about immediately. He was always on horseback, whatever weather it might be, traveling in his carriage only when his army was 2 or 3 marches in advance. This was a calculation on his part, a point where he was always entered into his combinations, and to him distances were nothing. He traversed them with the swiftness of the eagle. He stayed but one night at Braunau and took the road to Linz. The army was nearly collected. He marched cautiously so that he might be able to maneuver and to be everywhere himself. He proceeded, therefore, by short marches to Linz. We followed the track of the Russians, but the repair of the bridges took us so much time that they gained upon us. The bridge of Linz was burnt. The emperor ordered it to be rebuilt. He made infantry cross to the left bank, and as he animated everything by his presence, it was not long before the cavalry was also enabled to cross. It was pushed forward on the roads to Bohemia, and 2 divisions of infantry under the command of Marshal Mortier were marched to support it. The emperor made these dispositions because he was apprehensive lest the Russians should cloak their retreat from him by crossing the Danube unawares. And as he was stopped at every step by the breaking down of the bridges, he conceived the idea of marching troops along both sides of the river, since the corps which was descending the left bank, not having the same obstacles to encounter, might easily keep close upon the Russians, and consequently oblige them to seek a passage further off. In this town, the emperor received a visit from the elector of Bavaria, who, having arrived in Munich after his departure, had hurried away to pay his respects and brought his eldest son along with him. They both dined with the emperor and returned to Munich. Marshal Duroc dispatched, as I have already mentioned, to the king of Prussia. Before the departure from Bologna, likewise joined the emperor in that town. He brought back nothing satisfactory from his mission, but at least he gave the assurance that the conduct of the cabinet of Berlin would be governed by events, or, in other words, that we should have to fight that power if fortune proved unfavorable to us. The The emperor thought that the events at Ulm had caused it to make reflections, but concluded that we had nothing solidly fixed in Berlin. At Linz, the emperor received intelligence from the army of Italy under the command of Marshal Massena. It had crossed the Adige and attacked the army of the Archduke Charles in the position of Caldera. The action, though indecisive, was very sanguinary. The Archduke, however, retired, probably because he knew of the march of the emperor upon Vienna. There came to Linz a flag of truce from the Emperor of Austria. It was General Julet, who had been inclined in the capitulation of Ulm. He had seen our army on that occasion and had given an account of it at Vienna. The monarchy was seriously endangered, notwithstanding the resources which it still possessed. It had need to gain time to bring together the army, the Archduke, and the Russian army, and wished to unite them by the bridge of Vienna. Had it been able to effect this junction, it would have found itself in a respectable situation. General Julet came in consequence to bring assurances of the pacific intentions of his sovereign and to propose an armistice. The emperor replied that he desired nothing more than to make peace, but that negotiations might be opened without suspending the course of operations. He observed to General Julet he was not furnished with any powers on the part of the Russians, who would therefore have a right to disregard the armistice. He desired him to go and put matters into a regular train and dismissed him. He left Linz and took the road for Vienna. He arrived at St. Pölten, where he was detained a day or two by an accident which had befallen the court of Marshal Mortier on the left bank of the Danube. One of his two divisions had got considerably in advance of the other and pushed on to Krems. Apprised of this circumstance, the Russian army made its dispositions and marched towards us. It attacked the French division, to which it was incomparably superior in number, enveloped it, inflicted on it severe losses, and would infallibly have destroyed it had not the second division come to its relief. The Russian took from us 3 eagles. These were the first that we lost. The little check threw the emperor into an ill humor and caused him to stay 24 hours longer at St. Pölten. General Julet, who had already been to receive his instructions, rejoined him in that town. He was more urgent than on the former occasion, for the evil was becoming worse, but he was not more regular, so that he met with no better reception. Austria was evidently solicitous to save Vienna and to gain time. There would have been nothing but danger for us to grant what she demanded. The troops set out from St. Pölten for Vienna. Marshals Lannes and Murat had entered that capital. They effected a surprise, which had so powerful an influence on the rest of the campaign that it cannot be passed in silence. General Julet had not returned to the advanced posts of the Austrians when our troops entered Vienna. The report of an armistice was circulated there by our enemies themselves. It was known that General Julet was still the emperor. For a fortnight past he had been seen continually going and coming. As he had not returned, the rumor of the armistice acquired plausibility. The Austrians, placed on the left bank of the Danube, had made the necessary dispositions for burning the bridge of the Tabor, and had merely covered it by a post of hussars. Marshal Lannes and Murat, wishing to save this medium of crossing so essential to the army, went themselves, accompanied by a few officers, to the Austrian post, where they repeated all the rumors that were afloat respecting the armistice. The commandant of the post took them for mere officers. They walked about with him and led him upon the bridge itself, which is of very great length. Some Austrian officers belonging to the troops on the other side, that is, on the left bank, came and joined in the conversation. Marshal Lannes' column of grenadiers, headed by an intelligent officer, took advantage of the moment when they had their faces turned towards the left bank. It had advanced through the streets of the suburbs of Vienna, which are in the island of Prater. It prevented the vedettes of the hussars from turning about to give the alarm. The French officer told them that it was a post which he was going to place on the bank of the river. They believed him, gave no warning to their post, which all at once saw soldiers debouching in its rear and the head of the column at the entrance to the main bridge. The Austrian hussars of this main guard, not seeing their officer who was on the bridge with Marshal Lannes and Murat, and besides having their heads full of the ideas of an armistice, stirred not a step. The column of grenadiers, moving in a double-quick time, entered upon the bridge and hastily gained on the other bank, after throwing into the water all the fireworks prepared for destroying the bridge. The Austrian officers perceived the fault which they had committed, but it was too late. and their gunners, who were at their pieces on the other bank, not aware of what was passing before their faces, durst not fire, because they saw their own officers on the bridge in conversation with ours. They suffered the column to come up to them, and soon saw their cannon themselves, and all that was there taken. Never was surprise better executed, never had it more important result, the junction of the Russian army with that which the Archduke was bringing from Italy was thenceforward impracticable. The army advanced from all points upon Vienna, it crossed the Danube, and marched on by the road to Znaim, to come up with the Russians who had repassed the Danube at Stein. This surprise at the bridge of the Tabor gave the emperor great pleasure. He moved his headquarters to the palace of Schönbrunn and made preparations to maneuver with all his forces either upon the Russians or upon the Archduke Charles, according as either the one or the other should be within reach. The army of General Kutuzov, which had recrossed the Danube at Stein, was marching by Znaim to rejoin the main Russian army at Olmütz, where the Emperor Alexander was. If that general, instead of repassing the Danube, had come and occupied Vienna, he would have given quite a different aspect to affairs. His reason for not doing so, at least it is believed to have been, because he was afraid that the corps of Marshal Davout, which marched on our right, would descend from the mountains of Tyrol after having been beaten and dispersed the Austrian corps of General Meerfeld, and contrived to enter Vienna before him, which might have been the case, but he had adopted this resolution at the time of his departure from Linz and marched. Nothing would have stopped him. In the magazines and arsenals of Vienna were found artillery and ammunition enough for 2 campaigns. We had no further occasion to draw upon our stores at Strasbourg or Metz, but could on the contrary dispatch a considerable materiel to those 2 great establishments. Vienna was now the emperor's capital and the source of all his means. The march of all the convoys became more rapid on this account. The occupation of Vienna and the surprise of the great bridge of the Tabor changed the situation of affairs. The Archduke Charles was obliged to throw himself on the right and to gain Hungary. To lengthen the way for him, troops were immediately marched upon Pressburg, which removed to a much greater distance the point at which he could have placed himself in contact with the Russians. The emperor stationed in Vienna the corps of Marshal Mortier, and outside to watch the roads to Italy and Hungary, the corps of General Marmont, which made together 4 divisions. Marshal Ney had remained in the country of Salzburg before Kufstein, which had a strong garrison. All these troops would have been the first employed had it been more advantageous or more urgent to act against the Archduke Charles. The emperor expressed some dissatisfaction that Marshal Massena did not march in such a manner as to be able to join him. At the same time that the Archduke should have it in his power to join the Russians, she thought he might have done. The emperor never would imagine that where he was not zeal, though the same frequently had obstacles to encounter in the hierarchy of subordinates. The fact is that the arrival of Marshal Massena would have given him extreme pleasure, but he was obliged to maneuver in such a manner as to be able to dispense with him. After making his dispositions on the right bank, he set out for Znaim, taking with him the rest of the army. On the very day of his departure, our advance guard, under the command of Marshal Lannon Murat, overtook the rear guard of the Russian corps, General Kutuzov. It was at Holebrunn that the action took place. From the time which had elapsed since the Russians recrossed the Danube, they ought to have been at a great distance, but in short, there they were found. The affair was warm. They behaved like brave soldiers, and we like men who had long been seeking them. General Oudinot was wounded on this occasion. We afterwards learned that the enemy's force consisted of the division of Prince Bagration alone. It had a great number killed. We, on our part, had 3 brigades employed. The Russians continued to retreat upon Znaim, and we to pursue them with all our means. The emperor had ordered the corps of Marshal Davout to march upon Vienna by the road of Nikolsburg. Ever since we had been in the line of retreat of the Russians, we might have tracked them by their stragglers and their sick. The soldiers who entered the list for the first time had a look of stupidity which rendered them anything but formidable to ours. It was easy to see how many things were deficient in the mechanism of that army, which has since learned a great deal. At 10 a.m., the emperor was informed that the Russian army had marched by the road to Brunn, and he made his army take the same road. In that city, he was joined by Marshal Bernadotte's 4 regiments of light cavalry, which were commanded by General Kellerman. They arrived by the Budavise road and had left Bernadotte and his corps at Iglau in Bohemia. The Bavarian infantry had gone with him, and the cavalry of the same nation was sent to him to replace that of Kellerman. This Bavarian cavalry, commanded by General Freda, was worn out with fatigue. It had been marched about in all directions, but as it approached the theater of more important operations, the Archduke Ferdinand, whom it was pursuing from in that direction of Bohemia, was no longer the object which engaged the most attention. The emperor set out from Zenaim, Fort Brunn. He had given the command of the United Grenadiers to Marshal Duroc, being desirous that he should distinguish himself during this campaign. General Oudinot had been conveyed wounded to Vienna. On his arrival at Brunn, the emperor found the citadel evacuated, the magazines full of stores, and from a negligence which is beyond conception, ammunition ready, prepared, so that we might make immediate use of it. The Austrian functionaries delivered all this to us with such fidelity that one would have supposed that they had received orders to do so. The same evening, the emperor pushed all the cavalry on the road to Olmütz and followed himself. At the first post on that road, we fell in with the enemy's rear guard. The Russian cavalry bravely charged all that pursued it, and would have kept up a running fight had not the horse grenadiers of the guard, who were there, cut this Russian line in two. The cuirassiers completed the dispersion of the other part, which was closely followed by our light troops. It was dark before this warm affair was over. The emperor returned to Brunn and came next day upon the ground where it had occurred to place his army, which was coming up in different directions. He moved on his cavalry, the advance guard, to Wischau. He went thither himself, and on his return he walked his horse over all the sinuosities and undulations of the ground situated in front of the position which he had ordered to be taken. He paused at every height, had the distances measured, and frequently said, "Those gentlemen, examine the ground well. You will have a part to act upon it." It was the same on which the Battle of Austerlitz was fought, and which was occupied by the Russians. That is, the position which they had before the battle. He passed the whole day on horseback, inspecting the position of each of the corps of his army, and remarked on the left of General Suchet's division a single hillock overlooking the whole front of that division. The senton was there, as if for the express purpose. Here he caused to be placed the same night 14 Austrian pieces of cannon, part of those found at Brunn. As caissons could not be placed there, 200 charges of powder were piled up behind each of them. The foot of the senton was then cut away en escarpement, and as to secure it from assault, the emperor returned to sleep at Brunn. Chapter 15. After the occupation of Vienna and the affair of Hollabrunn, the emperor was strongly solicited by all about him to make peace. He was himself disposed to do so, but the Russians were in presence, and it was first requisite to measure his strength with them. Next day, 2 envoys arrived from the Emperor of Austria. One of them was Mr. Stadion. The name of the other I do not recollect, but I believe it was General Gillet again. The Emperor received them and no doubt spoke to them concerning his intentions, but as these gentlemen came to treat once more for Austria alone, announced that the Emperor of Russia would himself send someone immediately for what concerned him. The Emperor Napoleon, who absolutely insisted that this power should be comprehended in the treaty, as he had previously intimated, dismissed them. M. de Talleyrand had received orders to come to Vienna, of which General Clark had been appointed governor. The emperor referred the Austrian deputies to him and gave some particular instructions respecting them to General Clark, after which he continued his military operations. He had already been several days at Brunn when he ordered the corps of Bernadotte to draw near. He had a peculiar tact for feeling the approach of any event which enabled him to turn it as best suited himself. He sent for me at daybreak. He'd passed the night over his maps. His candles were burnt down to the sockets. He held a letter in his hand. He was silent for some moments and then abruptly said to me, "Be off to Olmütz. Deliver this letter to the Emperor of Russia and tell him that, having heard of his arrival and his army, I have sent you to salute him in my name. If he questions you," added he, "you know what answer ought to be given under the circumstances." I left the emperor and proceeded to our advanced post at Wischau, where I took a trumpeter and repaired to those of the Russians, only about a league distant from ours on the road to Olmütz. I found that we were far advanced at Wischau and out of our natural line, but the officers who were there could not help being aware of it and keeping upon their guard. I pursued my route. I was detained at the first post of Cossacks till notice could be given to Prince Bagration, who commanded the Russian advance guard. He sent Prince Trubetskoy to receive me and to conduct me to him. From the advance guard, I was taken to Olmütz to Kutuzov, the commander-in-chief. This little journey was performed at night through the whole Russian army, which I saw assembling and taking arms at daybreak. I arrived at General Kutuzov's at 8 in the morning. He lodged in the suburbs of Olmütz. Everything was packing at his house. I saw plainly that he was preparing to follow the movement of his army. He asked me for the dispatch which I had brought for the Emperor Alexander, observing that he slept in the fortress and that the gates could not be opened to me. I replied that I had orders to deliver it myself, and I was not in a hurry, and would wait till the hour most convenient to the emperor. That if this could not be permitted, I begged him to let me be conducted back to our advanced posts, and the Emperor Napoleon would afterwards send the letter by a trumpeter. General Kutuzov did not insist, and went away, leaving me with an officer of his staff. I saw there a great number of young Russians belonging to the different ministerial departments of their country who talked wildly of the ambition of France, and all of whom in their plans for reducing her to a state of harmlessness made much the same kind of calculations as the maid with her pail of milk. From the nature of my situation, I was obliged to listen to all this idle gossip without replying. It was 10 in the forenoon when a bustle took place in the street. I inquired the cause of it, was answered, "It is the emperor himself." He stopped before the house where I was. I lighted and entered. I had but just time to throw off my cloak and take my dispatch out of my pocketbook before he was in the room where I had been waiting. He made a motion for all present to retire, and we were left alone. I could not help feeling a certain fear and timidity on finding myself in the presence of that sovereign. He awed me by the majesty and nobleness of his look. Nature had done much for him, and it would have been difficult to find a model so perfect and so graceful. He was then 26 years old. I felt regret at seeing him engaged in so bad a business as that of Austria then was. But I was aware, too, of all the facilities possessed by intrigue, influence of mind that could not yet have sufficient experience to grasp all the difficulties which existed for conducting to a successful issue all there was on the political horizon of Europe. In the winter of that year, 1805, I delivered to him my letter saying, "The emperor, my master, having been informed of his arrival at the army, had ordered me to carry to him that dispatch and to salute him in his name." Alexander was already somewhat hard of hearing with the left ear, and he turned to the right to hear what was said to him. He spoke in broken sentences. He laid great stress upon his finals, so that his discourse was never long. For the rest, he spoke the French language in all its purity, without foreign accent, and always used its elegant academic expressions. As there was no affectation in his language, it was easy to judge that this was one of the results of an excellent education. The emperor, taking the letter, said to me, "I duly appreciate the proceeding of your master. It is with regret that I have armed against him, and I shall seize with great pleasure the opportunity of giving him that assurance. He has long been the object of my admiration." Then, changing the subject, he said to me, "I will go and peruse his letter and bring you an answer to it." He went into another room and left me in that where I was. In half an hour he returned, and holding his answer with the address turned downward, he thus began, Sir, you will tell your master that the sentiments expressed in his letter have given me great pleasure. I will do all that lies in my power to return them. I have no wish to be his enemy or that of France. He must recollect that in the time of the late Emperor Paul, while I was yet but Grand Duke, when the affairs of France were thwarted and had to encounter opposition in most of the cabinets of Europe, I interfered and greatly contributed by causing Russia to speak out, to induce by her example all the other powers of Europe to recognize the order of things which had been established in your country. If at this moment I am swayed by other sentiments, it is because France has adopted different principles, which the leading powers of Europe have deemed dangerous to their tranquility. I am called upon them to concur in establishing a more suitable order of things, and which shall be satisfactory to all. It is to attain this aim that I have left my own country. You have been admirably served by fortune, it must be confessed, but as a faithful ally, I will not desert the King of the Romans, meaning the King of Germany, at the moment when his future existence depends upon me. He is in a bad situation, but it is not irremediable. I command brave men, and if your master compels me, I shall order them to do their duty. Answer. Sire, I shall not fail to remember the message which your majesty has done me the honor to deliver to me. I take the liberty to observe, however, that I am not here in any character, nor have I any other mission than to bring a letter. But your majesty speaks to me of events and circumstances with which I am acquainted. I have passed through the revolution of my country, and if your majesty would deign to listen to me on the subject concerning which you have done me the honor to speak to me, I could satisfy your majesty on many points. I think I can answer for it that the emperor is more than inclined to peace. This very proceeding, this might furnish evidence to that effect, independently of all I should advance to support of it. The emperor. You are right, but the proposals which preceded ought by right to have been conformable with the sentiments which have dictated this step. It does the greatest honor to his moderation, but does it argue a wish for peace to propose conditions so disastrous to his state as those which are offered to the King of the Romans? I perceive you are not acquainted with them. Answer. No, sire, but I have heard of them. The emperor. Well, if you know what they are, you must admit that they are not such as can be accepted. Answer. Sire, respect here imposes upon me a duty which I fulfill, but since your majesty condescends to listen to me, I have the honor to remark that the emperor demands nothing that is beyond the pretensions which he is able to support, and which are the result of a resolution induced by events that he has not provoked. He considered himself as being in profound peace, especially with Austria. He was completely absorbed by the preparations for his expedition against England. He has been suddenly diverted from this occupation, obliged to relinquish the enormous expenses which it has cost him, and to order new ones for the support of a war begun against him without any previous declaration, so that but for an accident which has befallen one of our fleets, our army might very possibly have been in England by the time that the Austrians appeared on the Rhine. Fortune crowns the efforts of the emperor and puts him in possession of all the resources of the Austrian monarchy. His army has as yet sustained but insignificant losses. In this situation, what has he to fear for the consequences of war? Should it be protracted, it cannot but augment his power. Admitting that he may lose a battle, it would not be productive of any very calamitous consequence to him. Vienna is at this moment his capital. His army has now nothing to do with the frontiers of France. But, sire, if Austria sustains a defeat, what may be its results? On what basis will she set on foot negotiations? If then, in this situation, the emperor is in the first to make overtures of peace, it is impossible to suspect their sincerity. He has thought it right to take the first step in order to spare the dignity of his adversary. But he wants a durable peace with good guarantees. The emperor. It is precisely for the purpose of obtaining a durable peace that reasonable conditions such as are not offensive should be proposed. Without this, it cannot be durable. Answer. Yes, sire, but war must not be made at his expense. Your Majesty will be pleased to consider what the emperor sacrifices by his departure from Bologna, what an opportunity he loses for putting an end to the war with England, the time uselessly employed, and lastly, sire, the fleet which he had just lost in consequence of all this. What would the nation say were it not to see some compensations for the inutility of all the sacrifices which have been imposed upon it for an operation, the success of which was bound up with his existence? And then what guarantee for the duration of this peace will be given to him beyond what has been given for the duration of the preceding, which nevertheless has been broken in a manner hitherto without a parallel? To me it seems that whatever peace the emperor may make with Austria, the allies alone will be the gainers by it, and that for his part he will always come off with real losses. The only advantage that he can derive from it is the diminution of the power of his enemy, the emperor. It is precisely this disposition to diminish the power of his enemies and to increase his own that alarms everybody, and is continually exciting wars against him. You are already a nation so strong of yourselves, by your union under the same laws, by the uniformity of your habits and your language, that you naturally inspire terror. What need have you to be continually aggrandizing yourselves? Answer. I know not what your Majesty means by our continual aggrandizements, for, with the exception of Genoa, I am not aware that we have acquired an acre of land beyond what has been ceded and recognized by our treaties of peace, which we have been obliged twice to seal with our blood. If it is to this point that the Allies would revert, here is an account to be opened afresh. Though this first quarrel of the revolution, in which we were not the aggressors, has been settled in so many fields of battle, we shall not be afraid to appear in them again. I see nothing but Genoa that we have acquired since the Treaty of Luneville. The Emperor. Genoa first, and then Italy, to which you have given a form of government that subjects it to your laws. Answer. To this, sire, I may reply that we took Genoa against our will. The emperor. Would oblige you to do so. Answer. Its position and its moral and physical situation, your Majesty would be mistaken were you to suppose that this annexation originated in motives of interest or ambition. Genoa has long possessed nothing but its marble palaces. That little republic has long subsisted solely on capitals acquired by a commerce formerly considerable, but since nearly annihilated through the weakness of a government which could no longer protect its navigation, even against the states of Barbary. In this respect, it was in the same predicament as Venice. Before we entered Italy, Genoa had nothing left but its name and its ancient reputation. Its port had become useless to it from the blockades of the English, whose ships we had excluded from it. Its territory, too, was next to nothing compared with the wants of its population, and our custom houses bordered its frontier. The Genoese were on all sides beset with difficulties. Add to this that the excellence of its port and the extent of its fortifications drew to it a foreign garrison, which was sent thither by the principal power the moment a war broke out in Italy. Placed thus amidst all the inconveniences of its position, and having none of the advantages of the protection of a great power, it could do no other than either consummate its ruin or throw itself into the arms of a protector. I ask your Majesty, whom could it have chosen to obviate the inconveniences which I have mentioned? We have taken Genoa with its active and its passive. This latter was superior to the other. A burden for the public treasury has consequently been the result. Had the annexation of Genoa been a calculation of ambition, it would not have been so long delayed, because it is easy to perceive what is most advantageous for ourselves. Formerly, in our different transactions with Austria, we were in a position to insist on a stipulation which she could not have obliged us to renounce. With respect to Italy, I have a still stronger argument. It is entirely our conquest. We have moistened it with our blood. It has twice recovered its liberty and its political existence by our efforts. If it set out with a republican form, it was that it might harmonize with the protecting power. The two changes which have since taken place are a consequence of the interests which associated it with our destinies. It has the same laws, the same usages, and the same administrative regulations as France. We have reciprocally communicated to each other so much of our habits as we conceived ought to be adopted, and if Italy finally resolved to place herself under the protection of a monarchical government, as France has just done, ought she not to choose a powerful monarch, of whose support a new state always stands in need? In this case, she had no option but between Austria and France.